Welcome, Scott.
Hey, thanks for having me on. I always enjoy these conversations and see where they meander around.
Thank you very much. I'm really excited to speak to you today. I'm a big fan of yourself and the Decade system. Tell the listeners a bit more about what Decade is.
Yeah, so back in 2013, I got my amateur status back after trying to play a little bit of part-time for a couple years. And uh, during that time, 2008, 9, 10, 11, I really started applying poker ideas and math and psychology to my game as a playing professional. And then they started slowly releasing some of the strokes gained putting statistics in 2001. And I could very quickly see that the idea of drive for show and putt for dough wasn't exactly true. I mean, it's all important at the end of the day, but I could just really start to see that the stats were going to let us see more insight into what's actually going on. So I kind of combined a whole bunch of track punch monitor shot pattern data with with the strokes gained putting statistics, and I could just again see that the main thing that people get wrong in golf is just trying to play far too aggressively. They're trying to force birdies everywhere. So I did a whole research, if you will, to just for my own game. Honestly, I just wanted to win the US Mid-Am now that I had my amateur status back and playing the Masters. And Will Zalatoris, who now I don't have to explain who he is anymore, luckily, but he was just a 17-year-old, excuse me, junior golfer at my home course. And had an injury the week before the Texas Amateur in 2014. So I just called Will and said, let me caddy for you next week. If you do what I tell you to do, you'll win. And sure enough, he won by 3. I didn't actually believe that, but sure enough, the dude won by 3. And luckily the US Junior was in Texas the next month. So I went down and caddied for him there and he won. And luckily I knew Jason Enlow, who was the SMU coach at the time. And he told me that Bryson just plays way too aggressively. And he could tell that I was doing something with strategy and mindset with Will. And so he asked me if I could come teach it to Bryson. So I did. And then a couple months later, he won the NCAAs and US. And now apparently I'm a strategy expert talking to guys in England.
Happy days. That's a pretty
Yeah.
cool journey you've been on then from was it like, were you struggling with your game? That's why you sort of went down that rabbit hole?
No, I was a guy that I didn't specialize in golf at college. Honestly, I played all the other sports, and I really started playing golf pretty late. I only played in one AJGA, which is the big junior tour here in the States. I only played in one of those events in my life. So I really just I was a guy that I'm pretty athletic, a pretty big dude, and I hit it really far and I hit it really well. But my putting definitely always was a hole in my game. And so I just always blamed my lack of results on my poor putting and the fact that I was an absolute lunatic on the golf course. And so I went to college, kind of played off and on. I had a couple of pretty big injuries. I broke my leg playing basketball with the basketball team. Shockingly, that didn't work out well. And um, graduated, turned professional the first time in 1996. And I won, 10 times around, the world on every tour except for the ones you actually want to win on. But I would say that it was actually a quasi successful professional career. Except then in 2001, after 9/11, and I just was exhausted. I just wanted out, and I was really just planning on taking a couple of months off and selling some electricity for one of my buddies that was starting an electricity company here in Texas. And it just was so easy. I just wound up doing that for 5 or 6 years. And then that's when I went back and played. I started working. I actually met Chris Como playing in an illegal underground poker game here in Dallas in 2003 or 4. I really need to figure out if it was 03 or 04. I could just ask him when did he move here. But I met Como playing underground poker and started working with him, just understanding modern ball flight laws. And even Como didn't know what the hell he was doing then. And so looking back at it, so much of the stuff that we were working on was just comically wrong. But here he was at the time. Well, shoot, what is he now? He's 44 probably. So he's probably mid-20s at the time. So he doesn't know what he's doing either. I didn't know what I was doing. But you could see where he was starting to think in biomechanics, and you could see where I was starting to apply the poker of the poker math to the poker math. Like that's anything. Poker math to golf, and the psychology. Like I say, that if you're going to get really mad in the game of poker, you're just costing yourself money. And interestingly, I never put that together in golf. Like, hey, dude, when you're getting mad, you're just costing yourself money. but the understanding of just the odds of math and the odds of poker, you just understand bad things are going to happen. And so you just learn to brush it off and move on. So really it was just all of those things coming together that again, why I wound up entering Q school. And, I've got through all 4 stages of PGA Tour qualifying in 2008 as a 35-year-old amateur. And it was all just by understanding my game. There's no way I was better as a 35-year-old with a full-time job than I was as a 25-year-old full-time playing professional. It was all understanding how to play the game better. And then obviously once Como got hired by Tiger, I could start to see some insights in the way Tiger approaches the game. Actually undertook a project kind of for both of them where I went through 20,000 of his shots by hand to kind of reverse engineer his strategy. And honestly, it just perfectly matches Decade, which is pretty crazy. The guy essentially played with mathematically perfect strategy, and then the patience and discipline that goes along with it. And I don't even think he realizes still to this day how much of an edge that gave him. So his, I'll call it perfect mindset, especially in his early and middle career, just a perfect approach mentally to the game, meditation, and his mother's Buddhist background, but then also just playing with perfect strategy. I really do believe that those two things explain away. I mean, yeah, he hits the ball good. There's a million guys that hit the ball really good. Yeah, he putts it really good. There's a million guys that putt it really good. It's the combination of being really good at all of it and then just never faltering. I don't want to say under pressure, but just never making emotional decisions. He just played correct golf all the time. And it's funny that we have to argue about some of that I have to argue about some of this sometimes, because if I ask you who are the 2 greatest players of all time, we're not going to say just the one. We're at least going to get Tiger and Jack there. Okay, who are the 2 best course managers of all time? Tiger and Jack. It's like, well, isn't there something to that? Like, doesn't that kind of make you want to explore the idea a little bit? And it's funny just because it used to be kind of mystical back in the day, like when to get aggressive and when to go for the middle of the green. And it's really the fact that golf is the only sport in the world that's not played on a uniform field of competition that really allows, golf to just be different than any other sport. If I was playing basketball and I told you, well, I don't know, this may not work in Europe, but if I told you that I was at the top of the key and did a turnaround jump shot, you kind of know what I'm talking about. But if I say I was, 147 in the middle of one fairway, should I aim at the flag or not? You're like, I have no idea. I'm going to need a lot more information. And that's why golf is just different. And as a result, it's a really, really hard game to learn, to play correctly.
Fascinating that you sort of figured out his strategy, reverse engineered, I think you said there. That's
well, yeah. I mean, if you see where he hits a shot from 168 in the fairway, just like a TrackMan shot pattern, you don't know where any one shot was aimed. Like, so I just hit a ball into my simulator here. It puts a single dot out there on the plot, the scatter plot. You don't know where I was aiming that one, but once I hit 100, you kind of start to get a pretty good idea. And so one day, once I got access to ShotLink through Como, I kind of started going through one of Tiger's tournaments by hand. I was like, it's interesting because not the data. That's what I do different than the other, data nerds out there where they just look at big data and there's a lot that gets lost in translation when you're doing it that way. I mean, honestly, from a lack of knowing how to do a lot of what they do with manipulating the huge ShotLink database, I don't do everything by hand, but there's a lot of stuff that I set out to just do by hand. I was like, I'm going to look at one tournament, and you can kind of start to see, honestly, even in just one tournament, a little bit of a pattern emerges where the ball's kind of consistently coming up towards the middle of the green on certain shots. And I was like, oh, well, that was interesting. Let's do one more. And then I did that for about 4 months where I went through 3 entire years, like I say, 20,000 shots where I would say, okay, he was 166. The pin was 4 from the right. There was a bunker on the right. His shot finished 16 feet long left. Cool. And then, hey, he missed some short-sighted too. So he missed it, exact same scenario, and he put it in the bunker. But once you do that shot, there would be, just making up a number, 500 shots in any given 25-yard bucket with any given surrounding hazard and hole location. You can pretty much see where he's, air quotes, centering his shot pattern, which to me, then that means that's what his target is. If you're on a driving range and you're hitting balls at a white flag, you should theoretically pretty well blanket that flag, half left, half right, not quite half long, because everybody mishits more shots than they hit good. But let's hope for 40% long, 60% short, maybe 65, 35, but definitely 50 left and right, maybe 53, 47 based on this, the direction of your shape. So if I fade my shots, hopefully it should be skewed a little bit to the right. But a lot of people, they don't even know how to center their shot pattern or their target. It's a funny question. People like, well, I missed 70% of my shots right. Should I adjust for that? I'm like, well, if I were sitting here, this is my American analogy. If I were sitting here with a gun and I kept on missing my target right, would you ask me the question, should I aim better? Like, obviously you should. I do think it's interesting because golf is the only sport. Well, I shouldn't say golf is the only sport. Golf, we don't have universal language around aim and target. And because most people think of aim as being their body lines. And that's not how I think of it. Aim is the center of your shot pattern, and you figure out how to get it there.
Fascinating. My head is spinning with 1,000,001 questions already. I thought we'd go this way. Tiger was hitting golf balls yesterday. Did you see it?
I did.
Did it get you excited?
No, I mean, there's not a bigger Tiger fan walking the planet than me. And I really do actually mean that. That guy is my absolute man crush. Even I was disappointed when he, all of his extra stuff came out in 2009. I was like, oh man, I was even buying into he and I are the exact same age. I've been watching this, since we were kids. But his leg was mangled in that deal. He's wearing that right leg thing, I'm assuming because of how mangled his leg looks. And if you watch that video, you can, again, it also hides how skinny his right leg is probably. And he's not even pushing off of it. Like someone posted yesterday about his footwork. I'm like, yeah, because he can't push off of his right leg. That is all left leg. I'm sure he's putting a little bit of load into it, but not much. And then the leg only comes up, the trail leg only comes up and off the ground as he gets into the follow through. It's not because he's pushing off of it. So hitting a nice flighty 145-yard 8-iron, which honestly, I really didn't think I was happy for him watching that because it made me realize he's going to be able to play solid golf in his life. I didn't know if even that was going to be the case. Honestly, I thought he might just be a guy that really can't play any golf. And so I actually made me happy for him that I do think he'll at least be able to play golf. But what you saw yesterday is a far cry from hammering drivers. I can't imagine him walking in 18 holes. And I can't also imagine Tiger riding a cart. I don't know. I really don't know. It did not excite me that he's going to actually make a comeback, but it did make me happy for him as a person. I think the dude, it's so easy to judge him. Like a lot of what I talk about is mental stuff and psychology and meditation and everything. And again, the guy's been through so much and it's so easy to judge him, be like, what a, pile of garbage for some of the stuff he did. But it's like, if you've never walked in that guy's shoes and seen what he saw with some of the stuff with his dad when he was younger and basically just been told he's the second coming of Christ since he was 4. And then he actually kind of was for, 10 or 15 years. It's kind of hard to judge the dude for being, a little, I don't know, I don't want to say full of himself is the wrong word, but just thinking he can do whatever he wants to. It's easy to judge someone unless you've actually seen that life from day one. And it's a tough one.
It's a tough one.
It was a tangent.
So you're not expecting him to win the Masters in April. Will he play in the Masters?
I don't think he'll be playing in the Masters. No.
Don't you? I think he's going to play. I hope so.
I don't think there's a chance he can walk that course. He would have to have a cart there. There's no way he can walk that golf course. Did you see this? So they posted a video of him walking into a hotel in Los Angeles just probably 2 weeks ago. And you can see he's just not putting any weight on his leg. He's not walking more than about 1.5 miles an hour. Yeah, he might have just, but his girlfriend finally caught up to him. And then he's just walking super slow and definitely avoiding putting any real weight on his right leg. I've heard, I don't know if this is accurate or not, but I've heard that the first 2 surgeons that came in, like wanted to amputate the leg. And they're like, I'm not doing that without his call. And finally took a third guy that came in and was like, I'll give it a whirl. I'll keep him alive. And then he can make the decision. Again, I have no idea if that's accurate or not. It came from a person I think might have some information on that. But
wow.
I mean, he my understanding is he had a lot of bones sticking out of the leg, and like it was literally just destroyed. So
Right.
yeah, I don't think I hate saying it because again, I really am a huge Tiger fan. I'm sure Tiger listens to your podcast. Tiger, I'm rooting for you, buddy. But
yeah, he does definitely listen. Yeah.
he's in the comment sections all day.
Yeah.
Trying to figure out how to work on his putting.
He's had nothing to do apart from listen to the Read It, Roll It, Hold It podcast.
Read it, roll it, hold it. I didn't even know that was the name of it. I like that. That's good.
That's what we're talking on today. Yeah.
I like that.
Okay, that's cool. Okay. Well, as we're big Tiger fans, let's keep talking about him. I've heard you talk about the Tiger 5. Can you expand on what is? I think what my understanding is, these are the 5 main stats that he tends to follow from your what you figured out. Is that right?
Yeah. So I'd heard from a number of people this over the course of 10 years or whatever. I shouldn't say this, since I started doing this over the last probably 6 years, that Tiger had these 5 stats he tracked whenever he was, in the late 90s, early 2000s, especially when he was really rolling. And they were, how many bogeys did he have on par 5s? How many double bogeys? How many 3 putts? How many blown easy saves? And bogeys with 9-iron or less. And he somehow figured out that of those 5 categories, if he could keep those to 6 or less per event, that he would, be in the hunt and or win. And we took those things. Obviously, blown easy save is subjective to Tiger's opinion. So we turned that into 2 chips, and bogeys with 9-iron or less, we just turned that into bogeys inside of 150 yards. Mm-hmm. And the actual number for people, that finished 1st to 5th, and we did 1st to 5th on the PGA Tour because sometimes DJ wins by 9, and that can kind of distort the numbers. So we try to get an average of a really good finish, and the actual number is 6.4 of those points per tournament. Tiger somehow knew that he could keep to 6, and just the interesting part about that is, if you think about every single round of golf that you ever finish and think I should have shot lower, which is 100% of your rounds, even your best rounds, you think you should have shot lower. It's never because you think you should have made this 30-footer or, hit that 7-iron closer or anything like that. It's always, well, I made that dumb bogey with the gap wedge. I tried to make that 20-footer and I blew it 5 feet past and missed it coming back. I had that super simple chip that I duffed. It's always one of those 5 things. And it's just comical that here's a guy again that somehow figured out, if I can just not do the stupid stuff, the birdies will be there. And it is comical. Like I work with so many tour players at this point. I probably send my packet out to almost 40 guys a week at this point. And you'll see them, on different podcasts every once in a while, and you'll hear like that stuff exactly coming out of their mouth. And it's just comical because it's like, yeah, now the whole tour's kind of starting to hear it and understand it, whether they've learned it from me or another data nerd or whoever. Most of these guys at this point know what I'm teaching and talking about to some extent. And it really is funny to just watch. I mean, the mindset of a lot of the guys that I know are out there doing this stuff, and then hear them on other podcasts where they're just like, yeah, I'm just not out there trying to make birdies and just letting those come wherever they may. And I mean, at the end of the day, it's similar to a Monday qualifier or, your qualifier at your local club or, a junior golf qualifier. If you are going out to it the next day and like a 4-spotter on the PGA Tour, well, do I play more aggressively in those qualifiers? I'm like, no, you don't, because I can tell you, if you qualify, you're going to call me back and you're going to say, yeah, I mean, I played the par 5s well. I hit a couple of decent wedges. I made an extra 20-footer. And I didn't give it back with stupid mistakes. Like that's what 90% of successful qualifying rounds look like. It's not like, wow, I hit 8 greens, birdied them all, and somehow got it up and down on all the other ones. Like they're just not wheels off rounds. And so a lot of what I talk about is those things are things you just can't force. And so, if you're playing your home course and you need to shoot 7 under, for these guys, that's maybe a 10%, 20% chance of that happening. I'm like, that's not going to just change because it's a Monday qualifier all of a sudden. If you could just go out and force shooting it lower, then you should be doing that every day and make it a 30 or 40% chance of shooting 7 under. It's just not how it works, mainly because shot patterns are so huge, especially shot patterns are so huge relative to how small greens and targets are. And as a result, you're really kind of waiting out variance within your shot pattern in order to, have those super deep rounds. And then it really is about just avoiding those Tiger 5 and not giving those birdies back. And 100% of the PGA Tour plays the par 5s under par every single year. And, like 1 or 2 guys play the par 3s and 4s under par each year. Like it's just how it works.
What's I've heard you talk about the Tiger 5 before, as I said, and what really sort of opened my eyes when I first heard that, or opened my ears, whatever, was that how it's almost how negative it is, right? They're all like, don't mess up, rather than go and make loads of putts and loads of birdies. And then you hear Tiger in like an interview and he's like, yeah, he's like talking about being really aggressive and, that sort of that attitude. Can you expand on perhaps what he meant by being aggressive?
I think a lot of times when you hear interviews, it's just bravado, just guys wanting to sound, because if you really dig deep into Tiger's interviews, I mean, it's all right there. The one that I always post on Twitter is where he's in the booth at the Hero, and the question is, Tiger, over the course of your career, did you play more aggressively or more conservative as you got a little older? And Tiger's like, oh, I've always played aggressively, 100%. And as I was sitting there watching that, I'm like, I'd already looked at 20,000 of his shots. I'm like, your brain can work so fast. I'm like, no, you don't. And he's like, I play aggressively, very aggressively, 100%, but I play aggressively to my spots. So wherever I decide that spot to be, I'm still playing aggressively to that spot. And I'm like, that's amazing. Tiger's so good at this. He doesn't even understand the question. The question wasn't, are you playing aggressively to conservative targets? The question was, are you playing aggressively, which means, are you firing at pins? And like, he literally just doesn't even understand the question. And so you'll hear him out there. The one thing that I do disagree with, that I would actually love to like have a conversation with him about one time, is the idea of missing it in the right spots. I don't think that's how the game works. The ball winds up missing in the right spot simply by your choosing to not be overly aggressive to certain pins. So I do think that one fundamental shift that I try to get players to see differently is, instead of thinking where's the right place to miss it, it's how much do I not want to be short-sighted. So I want you to be as aggressive as you possibly can, given, I mean, that's basically what the decade acronym is: distance, expectation, correct target, analyze, discipline, execute. The distance and correct target is how far do I need to be aiming from the edge of the green for starters. And so you start there, and then you look at what the adjacent hazard is. So if the pin is on the front right, I want to know what the front right hazard is. If the pin's on the back left, I want to know what the back left hazard is. And then we're going to tighten up that target a little bit based on, how penal the area is around the hole location. And so let's say that there's a lake on the front right and the pin's on the front right. Well, where's the place to miss it? Somewhere towards the middle or left side of the green, like duh. So, but I'm not choosing to aim it over there because that's the place to miss it. I'm choosing to aim it over there because I don't want to be short-sighted to that pin. And so I'm getting a little bit more conservative in that scenario. But if the pin's on the back left and there's a lake on the back left and there's nothing short right, there's not this magical shot pattern that either goes close to the hole or misses over there to the right. It is a shotgun blast. It's just a giant shotgun blast is what your shot pattern looks like. And so I do think that the idea of missing it in the right spot is a bit of a non sequitur, just doesn't quite make sense when you really get in and dig into it. And, there's certain things with like trying to leave the ball below the hole or trying to take in certain accounts of ridges into play. Again, shot patterns are so large. It's not like you're moving them 10 or 20 yards to actually remove those ridges or whatever, slopes and greens. You wind up really just putting a different portion of your shot pattern on those slopes. So stuff like that, I really don't even the math supports that you really just don't even need to take those things into consideration.
Fascinating stuff. Scott, it's really interesting that yesterday, like, the penny dropped with me. I'm 34, or am I 33, 34? I can't remember. Getting old and can't remember my age, but I was with some county golfers yesterday, under 18s, and myself and Will, one of the other guys, decided to play a 3-hole match play with them, foursomes. Anyway, so we won the first hole, last 3 holes, half the second. We won up playing the last, and we had Will teed off, and I had 105 yards. Pin was on the right. I knew the distance. I worked out the slope. I worked out the wind, and I picked my target. Having listened to your podcast last week, knowing in prep for this, I was like, right, I'm going to be aggressive to my target. So I picked this tree about 15 foot left. That's all I had to do is plonk it on the green, match over. So I've aimed there, stood over the ball, hit the shot, and something in me is, I knew, I sort of thought, I don't know, I would just like hold it off a little bit. Do you know what I mean? So I was aiming left at my target, but then I didn't quite commit to that target. I knew I could, I thought I could just try and sort of be a bit greedy. The wind got it short right in the bunker. We made 5, we halved. I lost the hole because it wasn't a poor club selection. It was a mindset. I did not commit to my target.
I do agree that a lot of what I've done with some of the psychology is, it's been out there before. Like, again, be present. Like, I get it. I do try to use the data to illustrate why some of these things, but I have never personally heard before me somebody talk about this idea of, if the pin's on the right. A lot of PGA Tour players, they understand that they need to be aiming towards the middle of the green, but then they hope they push it, like you were just saying, or pull it. Yeah. That is one thing I do think that I've brought, because you have to play the game at a pretty high level in order to even understand that we do that as good players, like, because it's so patently stupid, it's incredible. But when I'm talking with PGA Tour players, literally they all are like, yeah, I do that like 6 times around. And I'm telling you, that is where all outlier shots come from. You've never stood on a driving range and thought, if I can just miss this thing 15 feet right, that's great. Like, and it's so weird because we get out on the course and we do it all the time. And the reason that I know we do it all the time is because I definitely did that all the time in my 20s when I was playing. Well, I mean, I did it even in my 30s once I, went back and played again. And I just know that that's, again, I'm not a unicorn. So I know that is what a lot of people do all the time. And it is just comical how ridiculous it is to do that. And so that's what Tiger's talking about when he says, I play aggressively to my spots. He doesn't even realize that most of his competition is literally not even trying to hit their targets. And I'd rather you aim at the flag and play aggressively to it than aim towards the middle of the green and not play aggressively to it. I really do think that the majority of outlier shots come from that mindset right there, or thinking don't in any form or fashion. Don't go left, don't go right. Kevin Tway bought the Decade app a couple weeks ago, just literally out of the app store, and he finished second 2 weeks later, which was his first top 10 in 3 years. And I had a conversation with his caddy the Monday or Tuesday after that finish, and he was like, there's just a lot of times that Kevin's out there and he's thinking don't go right, there's OB on the right, so he's thinking don't go right. And I'm like, well, that's why we choose a target that's at least 35 yards left of that, and then we play aggressively to that spot. I know there's OB right, that's why we chose the target that takes that into account. Now you just stand up there and hit it as hard as you can, just like you would on a driving range. Because again, those outlier shots, they really, I mean, again, this is all commensurate to your level of skill and blah, 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 blah. But those outlier shots, especially for guys like that, they just don't happen on the range very much. So it really is all, I hate saying it's all mental because that's just a non-answer, but at the end of the day, it really is all mental. It's just one thing that I played in the 1999 US Open. And I only remember this because I just gave a presentation at the Golf Magazine Top 100 in Pinehurst, which basically my speech was, here's all the dumb stuff I did 20 years ago in the US Open here. And one of the main things was I was dead last in the field in total putts. because I hated seeing it. It's that idea of pro side versus amateur side. I hated seeing a putt break low. So I would read the putt, and then I would just put like an extra half a cup onto my read, or full cup, depending on how long the putt was. And I just kept missing it high for 36 straight holes. But I was on the pro side, and it's just comical looking back at it, because that's just so dumb that it never crossed my mind. Like, hey, you're reading it, and then you're thinking, don't miss low. Well, you're not missing low ever. And you're also not making anything. You should have a pretty even distribution left and right of your misses. And it's just, there's so many of these old little cliches that aren't quite right. There's some solid logic ish behind why they might be like, oh, well, the ball's going to tumble in more from the high side than the low side. Yes, it's not like it's sitting at a 45-degree angle, though. It's like 1 or 2 degrees. It's not like the ball is just, gravity is overwhelming on a 1.5-degree slope. So there's just a number of little things like that that just aren't necessarily helpful, that I try to help players see through, because they're not correct, and they're just kind of suffocating.
Yeah, fascinating, interesting stuff. So talking on putting, let's dive into some putting stats. So my first question here is, and this actually come from one of my students, Jack Rudge, who asked me to ask you this question. So I thought I'd give him a mention there. Is, what putting stats should amateurs focus on?
That's a tough question, because I do think of putting as being two different. Putting in the full game, it's two separate games. Basketball is all one game, but I really do believe of putting and the long game being distinct. And so I wouldn't say amateurs, I would just say negative strokes gained putters. Okay. And honestly, this will sound weird coming from a guy who sells a stats app for a living. I don't really find statistics that interesting for the most part. For the most part, people, you kind of have a general idea if you're good or bad, but what you've really got to use some of those stats for is, if you're negative strokes gained putting, you want to look at your 3 to 4 foot make rate, which will pretty much tell you if your line is any good. If your make rate from 3 to 4 foot, 3 to 5 foot, something like that, is where it should be, and then you're not making very many putts outside of 15 feet, it's a pretty good indication that your speed is terrible. But there's very few blanket statements I'm comfortable making, but your speed is terrible I'm pretty comfortable saying that to anyone that walks the planet in golf. And so if you think of it, well, I mean, I have, tour players, I'll have them all the time when we first get started. I'm like, go take a 20-foot putt, roll 20 putts at just a ball mark, dead straight 20-foot putt, roll 20 putts at a ball mark, move them off to the side so the prior putt's not getting in the way. And then look at your shot pattern, and it will be 4 to 6 times deeper than it is wide. I don't care what your skill level is, because if you're a 10 handicap, sure, it'll be wider, but then it's also going to be deeper. Just everybody's speed relative to their line is terrible for the most part. Even guys with great speed, it still is going to be deeper than it is wide. And so if you think about a 15-foot putt that's breaking 2 cups, if you hit a putt too soft, given the exact same start lines, if you hit a putt too soft, it's going to start breaking sooner. If you hit a putt too hard, it's going to start breaking later. So even given the exact same read and the exact same start line, the width of your shot pattern is actually dictated more by your speed than your line. I don't know if you guys have hurricanes over in England. I don't think you do, but on the Weather Channel here in the States, when you have a hurricane coming into Florida, they'll put these little hurricane trackers on, and when it's right by the hurricane, it's really tight. And then the further it gets away from the hurricane, it starts turning into a funnel. That's really what putting shot patterns look like. The longer the putt, the wider the funnel. And again, that's not because you started it further right or left for the most part. It's because you put different speed on these putts as they get longer and longer and longer. And I just try to, again, my dad and teachers told me back in the day, like, you got to practice your speed. You got to practice your speed. And I did by just randomly rolling balls all around the green. And I really think at the end of the day, you're just not getting very good feedback when you're doing it that way. I've got a wedge shot that I can hit with a 60 degree that I can literally hit this thing between 58 and 62 yards, like every single time, with the majority of them being 60 yards. It's pretty spooky, to be honest. And I do that because I've got this one position that I just own in my, my backswing for a 60-yard shot. And I've turned my putting into more of that by understanding that when I'm doing a speed drill, I'm trying to roll the ball kind of the exact same distance time after time. So it's a ladder drill essentially, where I'm just barely rolling it 6 inches longer each time. So yes, I am rolling it progressively longer, but I'm getting good feedback if I hit a putt about 20 to 30 feet almost every single time. And you really start to kind of own a little position that is great for that speed number. And then you need to understand, like, okay, this putt's a little bit uphill, or this putt's a little bit downhill, and you just start changing that position a little bit. But when you're just randomly rolling balls around a 40-footer, a 20-footer, a 30-footer, a 19-footer, like, you're just not getting really solid feedback, in my opinion. And so since I've switched to just doing exclusively speed drills, we've got 2 of them in the Decade app. One that's for basically putts from like 10 to 40 feet, and one that's putts from 5 to 15 feet. And once you're really rolling putts into these little buckets in an organized manner, it really is incredible how quickly your speed practice can improve. I mean, that's why you see behind me here, I've got a 30-foot well putt mat that I can just sit here and do speed drills on, here in my simulator, because I that's the only thing that matters, is being able to control that speed. It's not the only thing that matters, but for the most part, it's the only thing that matters to most people to actually improving their putting.
I love that. I love that. Just going back into the drill for the listeners, perhaps to take away from today, Scott, can you just explain, or share with us a nice drill to really help?
Yeah, and I'll try to. So if you take 4 ball marks and you put them in a row 1 foot apart, so then you've got a 1 foot window between the first and the second ball mark, a 2 foot window between the first and the third ball mark, and a 3 foot window between the first and the fourth ball mark. And then you start rolling from 5 feet. You're trying to roll it between the first and the second. So from 5 feet, you're trying to roll it into a 1 foot window. If you're successful, you move yourself backwards 6 inches. So this is a drill that I modified from Cameron McCormick, one that he has all of his players do. And I honestly used to watch Jordan Spieth do basically this drill when he was a junior golfer at my home course all the time. And I was like, this kid's a really good putter, but it never dawned on me, like, hey, he just sits over and does a speed drill all day. And so if you're successful, the reason I modified it was they have you ladder around the prior putt, and then the prior putts all wind up getting in the way really quickly. Instead of lagging around the prior putt 6 inches, I have you move yourself backwards 6 inches. So start at 5 foot. If you're successful rolling it into the 1 foot window, you move back to 5 feet 6 inches, and you're trying to roll it into the same window. If you're unsuccessful, you stay there. If you're successful, you move yourself backwards another 6 inches, and so on until you get to 10 feet. Then from 10 to 20 foot, you're trying to roll it in between the first and the second ball mark, or excuse me, the first and the third ball mark. So into a 2 foot window. If you're successful, you move yourself backwards 6 inches until you get to 20 feet. And then you're trying to roll it between the first and the fourth ball mark. So into a 3 foot window, and you do that all the way back to 30 feet. And you'll be amazed at how quickly you get good at that drill. And once you're, kind of owning that drill, you then compress the buckets down one. So now you're trying to roll it into the 1 foot window from 5 to 20 feet. Okay. Then you're trying to roll it into the 2 foot window from 20 to 30 feet. So the tens digits of 2, and I understand you guys use meters or whatever, but figure out feet. So from 20 to,
okay.
Yeah, from 20 to 30 feet, you're trying to roll it into a 2 foot window. And then from 30 to 40 feet, you're trying to roll it into a 3 foot window. And it really is incredible. That 3 foot window, it really starts to look like a trough. It just looks huge really quickly. And so now if I can control my speed for the most part into a 3 foot window, 4 foot window in practice from inside 40 feet, now hopefully you can go out on the course and control it into an area, honestly, twice that size. A good putt from outside 20-ish, maybe 30 feet is inside of 10% of the length of the putt. So a 40-foot putt, inside 4 feet is a really good putt. Well, that's 4 feet short to 4 feet long. That's an 8-foot circle. I mean, that's a pretty damn big circle. And what's crazy is the PGA Tour players only get about 75% of their first putts within 10% of the length of the putt from outside 30 feet.
Wow.
So 3 out of 4 putts, they're getting it, but so all the way up to 60 feet, that's a 12-foot circle. And they only get it inside of that 3 out of 4 times. I mean, I think that's pretty crazy, honestly, because it's never going to be their line is that far off. It really is typically their speed is that far off. And again, that's a pretty long putt, but again, that's where, I don't want to say the best putters separate themselves, but the great putters. So your initial question is, what can a poor putter, an amateur putter do to improve themselves? Start getting those lags within 10% of the length of the putt. And it's kind of hard to screw it up from there.
I love that. So the exercise is like twice as hard as the real thing, maybe, because you're aiming at sort of 5%, and then when you go and play, you've got a 10% window. Is that so? It's because it's harder in.
Exactly. I mean, and again, that comes down to just the math of what the guys on tour do. So if that's the average on tour, then that would be like a 0 strokes gain putter ish. There's a couple caveats that I want to throw onto everything always, but now we're going to have line and read problems, and the ball will be breaking differently given different speed. But for the most part, yeah, I do believe that if you can control it within a 5% window, as you say, then a 10% window should be pretty manageable from a speed standpoint in actual golf. Again, because rather than kind of hitting the same putt over and over again, now we are really changing the putt on a hole by hole basis. So every 15 minutes, you've got a completely different putt. That does start to obviously throw a few different wrenches into the situation.
I love that. I love the way that the drill is just placing your attention on that sort of window, and just placing your attention on that window improves your putting.
It just the way you said places your attention right there is brilliant, because a guy tweeted out yesterday a picture from PJ National, one of the top AJGA events. He tweeted out a picture, and it was 3 different kids with 3 different training aids around the hole at like 4 feet. And he said, which is your favorite training aid? I'm like, whichever one gets them, focusing on their speed more, and that's none of those. And it is funny. I do believe, well, I mean, again, I don't know if you released the video of this or not, but over there, you can see against my wall, I've got one of those yellow VJ Trollio's yellow putting arcs. And then there's an eyeline putting rod sitting in the corner. And I've actually got that, don't tell whoever winds up buying this house, but that arc is nailed into my wood floors over there, because I've got it to where my butt is barely touching the wall behind it. And then that arc is in the exact position it should be for my stroke there. So I can practice my stroke there. And then just as you would practice your stroke and then move in for a putt, then that's what I've got. You can barely see the white and red lines running down the side. Yep. And then that's what I roll the putt down, and I've got it just all measured out exactly. It's a custom built putting mat, that I had those lines, the exact distance I wanted from the wall. I had to where I could just set in I'm a big block practice guy. I want to work on my stroke away from the course. First of all, I won't screw the greens up like those kids were doing, just sitting there hitting the same putt over and over again. But I want to work on my stroke here with controlled, what is it, everybody, the smart people say, constraints, with constraints, to where I'm just sitting here doing the same thing over and over again. And then I'm working the speed drill that I work on this mat is what I call it's just another one of the speed drills in the Decade app. I call it the moonwalker, because I try to roll it to the end of the mat. So rather than rolling most ladder drills, you're rolling it past the prior putt. I actually try to roll it, just because of the way that I've got this organized in here. I try to roll every putt 6 inches short of the prior putt. So I'm rolling it 35 feet, 34 and a half feet, 34 feet, all the way back to 5 feet. So, and I just keep doing the same thing over and over again. And honestly, the reason I did is the first time I did it, I hated it. I was like, oh, I suck at this. I was just decelerating into it. So it was a hard one. And also I stopped. I was like, never mind. And I was like, wait a second. If you suck at it, maybe that's an indication you need to work on it. I really did start working on that one. And again, it's been really helpful, because it's the easiest way to practice your speed indoors, just because it's pretty hard to have a putting green sized area to roll roll putts into.
Love it. I like that as well, because I think it goes against quite a common belief of golfers is, oh, you get the ball past the hole, right? It's like, I hate, it's a bugbear of mine, 20-foot putt. You got 16 handicap golfers, got to get it past the hole, and they're knocking it 4, 5, 6 foot past. And, if they leave it 6 inches short, they can get peed off. But,
if you think about, so if you think about, let's just, I mean, I had Aaron Wise, who's a good putter. This was back when he was the reigning rookie of the year. I had him roll 20-foot putts, and his shot pattern, literally hitting the same putt over and over and over again. His shot pattern was 4 feet deep. And so if you think about never leaving, like you just said, if you never leave a putt from 20 feet short, you will have 4-footers coming back. The 4-foot make rate on the PGA Tour is 88%, but that's 3 foot 1 inch to 4 feet. Like, it's not a 4-foot putt. It's actually like 3.5 feet is 88%. Okay. And that's just not a very long putt. And I do think that's incredible to know. And, you only have, I think the number is 2.6 putts between 3 to 5 feet around. You just don't have that many putts that are in that really tricky, range. Once you kind of get outside of 8 feet, people know putting's hard. Once you get inside of 3 feet, most people don't miss anything. And so it's that little 3 to 5 foot window. But so if you've got, again, it's just the idea of, if you think of a normal distribution curve, some of this stuff is hard to explain without visuals, but if you think of a normal distribution curve being 4 feet deep, if you don't leave any short, you've also centered the meat of your distribution curve like 2 feet past the hole. You've made the hole pretty small. But if you leave a putt, 25% of your putt short, 30% of your putt short from 20 feet, you've now centered the vast majority of your putts just past the hole. And sure, you're going to leave, some putts short. And that 6-inch putt that had no chance of going in, well, that 4 foot long putt had no chance of going in either. Yeah. And that's what people have to see, is like, just because it got there doesn't mean it had a chance. And what you're really doing also is you're making the hole as big as possible for about 50% of your putts. And you've traded that 4 foot putt coming back for a 1.5 foot putt short. So now you've actually reduced your 3 putt rate. Your overall make rate doesn't drop. If anything, it actually goes up too. And that's really, I think, the hardest thing for people to truly understand and trust is just the fact that Dave Pelz did the best that he could with the tools that he had at the time. And just as people went a couple of years ago, when everybody was doing their studies for pin in versus pin out, and everybody was coming up with pin in. And I'm like, well, what are you guys optimizing for? Strokes to hole out or make rate? Well, make rate. Well, that's not golf. We want to optimize for strokes to hole out. And I was the only person that really took the contrarian stance of like, no, and if you have a putt that you think should be hit with pretty good speed, so let's call that for amateurs inside 15 feet. But even if you've got a 10 or 12 footer that's a slick downhill putt, I mean, you can leave that thing in because it's going to help some putts that would have gone screaming past. So really the question for that is, do you think you'll hit this putt with good speed? And if so, the pin's not going to help you at all. If you think it starts getting a little bit dicey, then you should start leaving that thing in. That's the same thing that Pelz did when he said 17 inches past the hole. That's true if you can leave, control your distance to the inch, and you're only trying to optimize make rates, which that's just not what we're trying to do in golf. So none of that stuff really is correct in my opinion.
Love that, Scott. Just going back to talking about the 5%, 10% sort of dustbin lid, we'd call it in England. Do you know what a dustbin lid is? Do you know what I mean by that? Like a trash can. No, you know what I mean? Perfect. Like a lid for a bin.
Yeah.
Anyway, so the 5%, 10% window, which is kind of the window, would I be right saying, for every shot in golf as a rule?
No, that every shot in golf. I mean, technically what I try to, actually, this is going back to Kevin Toy's caddy. It gave me a thought for trying to do something different with my tour players, is basically just looking at any shot outside of 10%. So if you've got a 100-yard shot that you hit outside of 10 yards, Like, I just want to look at like what went wrong here, because that's really the shots that I'm trying to find for my players are these outlier shots. What could we have done differently? 5 to 7% of the length of the shot is usually, right around what I think tour averages on a lot of these shots. Or 5% would be good, 7% would be average-ish, and 10% would start being pretty bad.
Yeah.
I mean, those are pretty big shots. I mean, 200 yards, that's 20 yards either direction. I mean, that's a pretty damn big circle. And it's funny because, again, back to Aaron Wise, I show people this shot pattern of him hitting 27 irons for me. And the shot pattern in practice, hitting the same shot over and over again, normalized to no wind off of a flat piece of ground on a driving range. It's basically 28 yards wide. And people are always like, there's no way his 7-iron shot pattern is that big. I'm like, well, if you go look at a shot pattern on the PGA Tour, I use number 15 at Innisbrook all the time. It's playing 95 yards this one day. And the shot pattern is literally 50 yards wide and 50 yards deep. Like, it's insane. I mean, it's literally insane. And the guys told me it's blowing about 10 miles an hour off the left this day, not much wind. And the pin's on the front left. And I chose that hole specifically because the green is 28 yards wide. So the green is the exact size of Aaron's shot pattern.
Right.
And here, these guys, the shot patterns are just massive. And that is all guys who like to fade it. The outlier shots are guys who like to fade it, trying to hit like a flighty draw to this front left pin and either smothering it left or flaring it right. That's wire shot. Double crosses are what makes shot patterns huge. And so when you look at this shot pattern, it's all guys trying to do too much because they're trying to make birdie on a hole that had 10 birdies that day and a scoring average of 3.22. Like, I don't need you to make birdie. Can you flare a 7-iron anywhere on the green and 2-putt it? And you just picked up 0.22 shots against your competition. And that's when people like, well, yeah, I can do that. I'm like, then I would do that. And it's just so crazy how you get out there and you feel like you've got a birdie or get a look at birdie on so many holes. And again, this is where it's super easy for me to sit around here as a 48-year-old and say this is so easy to do. I mean, I haven't really played much golf in the last 5 years since I started teaching this because of chronic elbow problems. I've had both elbows operated on this year because I'm planning on taking the next, year and a half, 2 years to really work on my game to go out and try the Champions Tour. Just because I'm like, this stuff is so simple and so straightforward, but it's so hard to do. But I do believe that the best players of all time, your Nicklaus's and Woods and those guys, they just got it. They just understood it for whatever reason. And I will say, guys, I get it. It's hard to stand up there and fade it to the middle of the green when the pin's on the left and just trust variance will work out and I'll make some birdies. Like, how can I not be trying to birdie every hole and again, I don't even want to say that I'm trying to make par. Like, I'm just hitting shots and just seeing what happens. I don't know. I do believe that that's the hardest part of this game. The physical part, physical part's really hard too. It's this paradox that I used to talk about all the time, that golf is so hard that you have to play it correctly. And once you play it correctly, it actually makes the game really easy. And once you understand that, it really becomes theoretically simple to do. Again, as I say that as a guy who doesn't play much golf anymore, and I say that it's easy to do, so I don't really carry a whole lot of credibility when I say that, but I do believe it's pretty simple to do once you understand the point.
Totally. Would you like a caddy for the Champions Tour?
Would I like one? It's funny is what I'm planning on doing is just getting a local kid each week and just going out and teaching them decade. Like, that's literally what, even if
that's why I want to be your caddy.
Perfect. Your local kid. I'll get you for the British.
Okay. That's a done deal, yeah?
Absolutely. Done deal.
I'll help you read the greens.
Perfect. Are you an aim point guy? How do you read greens?
Aim point.
Yeah. It's just aim point. It's pretty brilliant. Like, it gets you a pretty damn good read, especially inside 15 feet. And then once you understand that you've got a shot pattern that you're just trying to roll down that line with decent speed and the hole will jump in the way of some putts, it really it really simplifies a lot of green reading. And honestly, one thing is you can see this, that now that instead of the lag putt, I've got an 8-foot wide mat in front of my screen there. And that's actually set my simulator screen, that's actually set at 1.5%. And
Uh-huh.
I honestly think that I'll be able to, instead of how people sit there and try to feel the with their left and right tilt, like I'm not very good at that. But when you stand there, if you can find the straight line, what you think is the straight putt, and then just stand there over the putt, like with your putter and everything. Like if I get really good at knowing what a flat putt is, you
Yeah.
can feel, I honestly think I'm going to try to read greens, aim point it that way by just moving my putting stroke around, or my setup around in a circle,
Mhm.
and then just feeling how much further or closer the putter feels to me in that setup. And I believe that that'll be, for me, a highly effective way of gauging the slope, because I'll have 1.5% that I just own. And then
Sure.
it'll be a function of, it's a little bit more, a little bit less than that. Well, 2 years ago, I entered Q school kind of as a joke. Again, I'm 46. It's not like I actually wanted to go play, professional golf. I just wanted to play some golf tournaments. And my knee was kind of hurting me. So I literally did not read a single putt. I would just be walking up and be like, well, it's clearly going left. It's not a ridiculous pin, but it's also not, I'm not guessing, it might be straight. That's 1%.
Yeah.
It's why did they put a pin there is 3%. And it's somewhere in between. I literally just kind of eyeballed it as I was walking up to the green. I did not bend down to read a single putt. And I was 0 strokes gained putting for the week, which again, as a 46-year-old amateur going off PGA Tour benchmarks on crappy greens without reading putts, like I'll kind of take that. And I do think that that's in the Decade app. We've got a putting combine tool that is from Chris Zambry, the USC coach back in the day. And it's the average length of the 18 starting putts on tour. So I think it's kind of silly. There's like 2 or 3 2-foot putts, but you've got to putt them out. And it's a way for you to quickly do 18 holes and be able to say, that was a -1, that was a +2, and did that work? So I'll be able to test, am I reading the greens very well? Is my strokes gained putting very good, without having to play 1 round a day and then look at the data? I can run that combine 3 or 4 times a day pretty quickly and start to get a lot of data really quick. Like, yeah, that's working. Like heads up. I definitely am going to try some heads up putting from inside maybe 6 or 8 feet. We had Sasha McKenzie on the podcast that I was part of last year. And he's talking about when amateurs putt heads up that they all do better. I'm like, that just seems crazy to me. I tried it at the Cradle when I played 9 holes with Sasha 2 weeks ago. And I felt like I was going to chunk any putt that was outside of about 6 feet. But it was honestly the first time I'd ever tried it outside. So it's something I'm going to tinker around with also.
Interesting heads up. I did a quick sort of study with 30 golfers trying it. I got their Sam Putt Lab data, looking at the hole and then looking at the ball. And the one stat that massively improved, which surprised me, was the strike. Their strike improved when they weren't looking at the ball. I thought it was going to go the other way.
Yeah, that's really
There's
weird.
only 30 students, so it's not a proper sample size, but
how many putts were they hitting?
10 both. 10?
I mean, that's a decent amount of putts, though. 300. I mean,
it's quite interesting how it didn't improve. But anyway, that's for another day. But I really look forward to caddying for you at the British Open.
Absolutely, I can't wait. Hopefully it'll be at St. Andrews. I got to look at the Senior Open schedule for 2024, I guess.
I love St. Andrews. That's the place.
Yeah.
Scott, I'm conscious of your time. I've absolutely loved that. We could go on forever. I'm looking at my questions, and I haven't asked sort of any of those questions, but that's okay. Maybe we do a part 2 in 2022. But I know you're a busy guy, so I'll let you get off and have some family time. Thank you so much for coming on to the show. Can you just quickly share with the listeners the app and what they need to do to check it out?
It's Decade Golf at this point. If you just Google Decade Golf, you'll find it. It's we're finally gonna. I've owned it. Just never even dawned on me. I've owned the domain decade.golf forever, and I've always used playinglesson.com. So if you go to playinglesson, not plural.com, or birdiefire.com, you'll find it there. I do hate saying it since it's my app, but I feel like I can say it since it's. I just took a bunch of ideas from a bunch of different apps that I saw that I thought were great. It really is a pretty cool app. It's amazing how many it's a little overwhelming, honestly, at this point. I can't even catch up on my email because I get so many inbound messages every day of people. I dropped from a 6 to a 2 or a 14 to a 7. Like, it's pretty crazy, but it really is just a way to look behind the curtain and see at the end of the day how professional golfers, the all-time greats, think. Again, I can say that pretty comfortably without even talking to a lot of them. Like, this is just how the game works, and they would not have been an all-time great unless they see it this way to some extent. And it's been like I say, it's been kind of an accident getting involved in this, since I should have played in the Texas Amateur in 2014, and I probably literally would have thrown Decade out the window by the turn in the first round, because I've been like, this is so dumb, I can play more aggressive than this. But since I was caddying for Zalatoris, I was like, well, he's 1 under. Let's just play it out and see what happens. He shot like 68 the first round. I was like, just driving home, I was like, that's really crazy. That was so simple. But at the end of the day, it really is just about getting people to see and think a little bit clearer, and then with a little bit more sanity, and then just play patient, disciplined golf, which is, it's funny because I get people to say, it's just, isn't that not fun? I'm like, I don't know. Isn't shooting lower scores more fun? Like, but I like trying the hero shot. Like, do you ever pull it off? Like, no, like, it's kind of rewarding though, to be in jail and make a smart par. Like, I don't know. It's weird. Some of the criticism or questions I get, but such is life. We'll definitely do a part 2 though. I appreciate that.
Thank you very much, Scott. Appreciate your time.
You got it.